A very traditional Jewish milkman experiences the turbulent times around the fall of Imperial Russia through the escalating challenges each of his daughter's marriages presents to him in the 1971 musical, Fiddler on the Roof. And that's the movie we're dusting off this week on Movie Bones.
A fiddler on the roof. Sounds crazy, no? But here, in our little village of Tevye, you might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we stay up there if it's so dangerous? Well, we stay because Tevye is our home. And how do we keep our balance? That I can tell you in one word. Tradition!
Going back to my childhood, I remember my family, we lived next door to a traditional Orthodox Jewish family, and one year, we were pretty good friends with them, and one year they decided to invite us over for the Passover meal, the Seder. And I can remember it even to this day, how much those traditions that Tevye is speaking of there were just like all around me in that dinner. I can still remember so many parts of it today. And as a Catholic and a Christian, it kind of actually helped reinforce where my faith came from. Obviously, Christianity came as an offshoot of Judaism. It was built on that base, you know. And so I could see the parallels in my own faith. There's so much that is actually important about tradition. There are people I know that have actually avoided watching this film because they think that it suggests that traditions aren't important. And it's like, well, first of all, they haven't watched the movie. So it's like, I say, like to tell them, watch the movie. You know, it's not saying that at all. But it does place tradition in a proper role. And there's so much I want to talk to you about on that subject. I'll start this off on a bit of a more trivial note. Did you see John Williams' name in the credits?
You know what? I'm not gonna lie to you. I wasn't really paying attention to that part. So
he didn't write the music.
Seeing that he had anything to do with,
he didn't write the music, but he did arrange it and he did conduct the orchestra for it. Mm-hmm. So it's one of his less, I guess you could say, it's a lesser achievement, but it's such a terrific score, and he did a great job of that too. I really have to say. Where do you want to start eating this pizza? Because it's a big pie. There's a lot to eat on here.
Real quick, like with this whole, people potentially thinking anyways, that this is saying that traditions aren't good. I didn't think that. I want to say that. I didn't think that throughout the film at all. Because, and of course I watched the film. But one of the things that we can talk about tradition just briefly is that with tradition, sometimes traditions are good. And I'm not saying they're bad. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they have no choice but to adapt. And that's one of the things that Tevye kind of is, he's kind of saying that. He's like, tradition, it's important, but also sometimes we got to break it. And sometimes we have to adapt it. And that's okay.
Yes.
Or at least we're going to be okay.
And sometimes, and it's like with the last test, sometimes it takes time for you to realize that the tradition and the thing that's fighting against it aren't actually opposites. In other words, you can have both. You see, and that's what I love about it. It doesn't. That's the ultimate realization at the end of the film. Up until the end, it's like he's been tested on all these other points and come to realize. And let me tell you, it takes a character like Tevye, who amongst all the people in his congregation seems to be among the most open-minded in general. He has an ameliorating presence among those he's around. He'll agree. He'll find something to agree with this guy who has this opinion, and he'll have something to agree with on the other guy on the other opinion. He's like, you both have good points. It's almost like he was needed for this.
One of the things that I have learned about Jewish people is the ongoing relationship that they have with God is not a relationship that is subservient so much as it's a relationship that is not, I want to say mutual, but almost mutual. And I say that because, like, this isn't like watching him communicate with the sky. That's what he's communicating with.
Well, he's talking to God. He's
Like,
talking to God.
you know what I mean? What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, like, we don't have like a physical person or anything like that in the movie. That's
Okay,
what that's what I mean. In the
I see.
movie, we don't have a physical person. He's always looking up,
Yes.
which is actually kind of neat because he breaks the fourth wall a little bit. So like when he's looking at the screen, he's looking at the audience.
Yeah.
And then when he's looking up, he's looking at God. So I say that because anytime he's looking up, you can see he's talking to God, and it's very like it comes across as a very like two old friends kind of talking, and that's just it's so beautifully done.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And,
yeah.
And I have to say, I think there's something as Christians we should be able to take from that too. I mean, there's a lot of times I've encountered this idea that it's like there's a certain way to pray, and you just pray these prayers, or you just and they're good prayers. You can talk to God. In fact, actually, God knows you on a deeper level than you ever could, and so there's biblical precedent for this too. Look at Job.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I keep thinking of Job. Job had it worse than Tevye did, but I mean, still. But it's the same kind of relationship. And it's like, you can be angry and express yourself with angry words. It's like, I'm angry right now and I need you to hear me because I am very upset.
Yeah.
And God's okay with that. He can take it because he's God.
Yeah.
He's not going to he's not going to get mad at you for that.
Yeah.
We could really learn something from that.
It's just a beautiful thing when you can you see the deep historical roots in something. This does take place in a real time period. In Russia, and this is imperialist Russia, by the way, even in imperialist Russia, while they weren't, I don't want to say they're treated good, but they weren't treated well because they kept their traditions, they kept their ways, they kept their customs. I mean, one of the things Russia would have loved for them to do is not be Jewish. They would have loved for them to be Eastern Orthodox. That's just like how they wanted them to be.
When the conflagration of state and religion together, and is proved negative for both, but it's like in this case the idea that it's part of the identity of the culture that you have to assimilate this way, and it's like they hadn't come across the understanding yet, and this takes time. That it's like you cannot compel that kind of assimilation, and when you look at it from as far as I understand it, and this is my understanding of the purpose of God, calling, a people out was to set them apart as a light actually for the rest of the world. Now that being put apart can also be taken as being set apart, that you have to stay apart.
Yeah.
And that's something even within the Catholic Church that we're struggling with in terms of different various groups within the Catholic Church, thinking that we have to wall ourselves off from the secular world, basically, that we have to kind of create our own bubbles of, that don't interact with the things that we disagree with. There's an impulse in anything that has tradition in it. It's going to be at least a temptation for part of that religion, that part of that faith to have to wrestle with. And to the degree you kind of fail the test, so to speak, it's like you tend to go in that direction of being isolated, perhaps as Tevye found out, more isolated than needed. And that's one of the great things the movie does. It kind of opens, he's forced to open himself up, not to the point where he's going to accept things like, well, eventually, like I said, his third daughter is converted. It's like he may never accept that, but he will still accept, his daughter as alive. And it's like, and that's kind of like where the movie finally finds its peace. And it actually brings the tradition back to its place, not in something you have to give up. Getting back to the original point, not in something you have to give up, but something that you have to realize is subservient to the idea of unity. What the purpose of faith is not to wall yourself off. It is to be salt and light, to the world. That's what it's intended for. And so it's go ahead. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, like, when it comes to, like, kind of not doubling back, kind of going back just a brief moment, talking about all this and, going back to this idea that, like, oh, it's negative against tradition. No, it critiques tradition, and there's nothing wrong with ever critiquing something.
No.
Because how are you going to be... Because that's one of the things I love about Tevye's character is exactly that, is that there is a line that it seemingly won't cross.
I beg you to accept us.
Accept them? How can I accept them? If I try and bend that far, I'll break. On the other hand, no. There is no other hand. No, Papa! No!
But Papa!
No!
We came to say goodbye.
We cannot stay among people who can do such things to others.
Goodbye, Papa.
Goodbye, Papa. Fietka.
And God be with you.
And God be with you.
We will write to you in America if you like.
We will be staying with Uncle Avram.
That's it. That is it right there exactly. It's his whole thing with like, oh, I don't want to bend and break. I will bend. If I bend too much, I'll eventually break. And that's just like, it's not true. That's the beautiful thing about this story. And that's what he's starting to accept, is that he can continue bending. Like, if we want to take a very positive look on where the story leads us to, which, like, I don't want to get into the tragedy part, because there's some tragedy a part of this movie. But let's go with everyone makes it to America. Everyone makes it to a place that is going to keep them safe for the next 40 to 60 years. But, like, he's saying, like, we hear that clip. It's like, no, if I've been too much. And he's like, I can't do it. And, like, you know, he's that emotional. It's so wonderfully done. But then, like, at the end of the movie, you hear that. In the movie, I think it comes across as more, not a whisper, but it comes across as more, you know, it seems louder right now, which, again, that's not a bad thing. That's a clip from the movie. But, like, it comes across as a little bit more of a, more whispered, like, you know, and God be with you.
Yes.
And then, like, which forces his oldest daughter to turn around and, you know, proudly shout that, you know, and God be with you. And I think that translates to his youngest daughter, who is, you know, I think she knows that her father's the one that said that.
Yeah.
And that gives them a spirit of hope. And it shows that, yes, this is something that he can't break from. And that's okay that he can't break from it. But he's starting to see that he can definitely bend with it, bend farther than he thought he could.
I think that for me, I would put it slightly differently. I think I would word it differently. I think I would say that for him, he realizes, at least at this level, what he thought he was being asked to do wasn't actually what he was being asked to do. In other words, that it wasn't actually that he was being asked to break his faith for the sake of being able, because that's the thing, is like, what is the ultimate, I think he's realizing that the ultimate purpose of all of this tradition is to have unity, some level of unity. And if you use the tradition to actually act as a method, as a wedge to break unity, I think now this is open to interpretation, but this is the way I take it. It's like when tradition is used to break unity, then it's not fulfilling its purpose. It's working against it. So even though the film
absolutely.
doesn't say that,
100% agree with that.
Oh yeah, that's my interpretation of it.
I'm just agreeing.
Yeah.
Jesus says, like, at the end of the day, like, what do you need? What do I need to do? Jesus says, love. Like, that's what you need to do. You need to love everyone. And that would include people in your family who go against the grain there. And then Paul's another person that, you know, backs it up by saying, or basically saying, like, we have nothing else if we don't have love. Yeah, we have nothing else if we don't have love.
The first daughter was the easiest. She was also the most mature. Obviously, she was the oldest, and you get married off in the order and progression that you were born in. So it's easier for that case, because the only thing at stake is Tevye's agreement with by the way, Laser Wolf is a terrific name. You know, it sounds so cool.
Right?
I know it sounds so cool, but I know it's actually a very traditional name. But it's like, it sounds so like uber modern. But it's like, but the whole thing with Laser Wolf is like he had an agreement, and that was a tradition, but it wasn't necessarily a religious tradition. It was more of a man-made tradition in that case, but it was also the fact that he is missing out on getting rich. He won't have access to Laser Wolf's resources like he was, like, if I was a rich man, right? But he's willing to give that up pretty quickly.
And you're right. He's able to do it. Like, you know, you're hinting at it, because he sees that these two are in love.
Yeah.
And Laser Wolf's not in love. Laser Wolf is, well, first off, he's older than Tev.
Oh, goodness sakes.
I think he's older than him because he says, I've always wanted to have a son. And he kind of says something like, I want him to be younger, but this'll do.
This'll do. Yeah. It's like,
yeah. But again, he sees that they are, his daughter and her childhood friend, the Taylor, they're in love with each other.
yeah. And it's true.
And it's true love. So yeah, he can't bend from that. Then his other daughter, the middle child. Oh man.
And falls in love with a revolutionary.
Yeah, that's the one I was like, ooh, good luck. You might not ever see her again. From just a historical perspective. Like with that, it's like, okay, he's like, because he wants him to stay. He wants him to, start a family and everything. And yeah, there's some part of me that's like, I was sitting there thinking about that because I've got 3 daughters. Like, of course, none of them are even close to that age yet. But I've got 3 daughters, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I could handle, like, out of all of the people in this one, I don't know if I could handle the middle child the most with this, because I'm like, no.
I was thinking a little bit subconsciously, is this movie kind of like hit a little harder for Ryan than me? You guys have 3 daughters. So
yeah, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it as the movie was going on, like the fact, and of course they've got more kids, but I was thinking about this as the story was progressing. I was like, how would I handle this situation? The first one, absolutely, I'd handle that one. The youngest one, again, I would probably, depending on the religion, to be honest with you. And you hear me saying that? I don't know if I could bend, or I don't know if I could bend and break potentially. But like the middle one, but she's willingly putting herself in danger for love. I'm like, oh no, you might be staying home.
It's like, it does make a difference when you actually have the child physically in front. You have children physically in front of you who you can see in those faces that are going off. And it's like, oh boy. And all props to Topol for his performance here. He is iconically associated with this role for a good reason. I mean, it's amazing. And he rips my heart out every time when he's at the train station. He does that several times, actually. But yeah, at the train station, that was one of those times, definitely. And you kind of are in his shoes a little bit, too, because the movie takes less and less time with the relationships of the subsequent daughters, to the point that you know the least about the last. And to the point where it's like, it almost looks like he's almost, like, does he like you for you, or does he like you just as someone he can, like, who's pretty and maybe I can convert her, Although he seems like a decent guy by the end, he's saying they can't stay there because of how nasty people have become to each other. But it still feels like you don't feel the relationship as much as the others, and you feel Tevye's position all the more for it.
No, absolutely. And like, I actually thought watching those couple scenes that like somehow the Orthodox Church might play just a slightly bigger role. It doesn't play too big of a role in this. When his wife goes to meet with the priest, and then we come back, and it's like she's hysterical, and it's like they got married.
Yeah,
it's like oh wow.
And it is,
and I will say this: I can't confirm this, but to do that for a priest, most likely, like especially in that time period, to do something like that, she had to convert. To Christianity.
It's a lot stricter going back.
This is not a interfaith relationship. This is definitely like she said, I believe in Christ, which, Jews and Christians, I don't say historically, but Jews and Christians get along more, oftentimes get along a little bit more. So it's like when you're looking on the outside and looking in, you might think, what's so wrong with that? You worship the same God. Yes, but still, you're breaking just a lot of norms and everything. And you got to remember too, while we might be Christians, they don't believe that part of it. And then that part of it, in their, I'm not saying it is like this, but in that part of it, it's like claiming yourself as something and following someone who claims himself as something is not, good necessarily in the eyes of God. So I can understand the fear from them. Again, like if my kid came up to me and said, I'm going to renounce Christianity, I would freak out.
Well, yeah.
Like,
and
I would be like, no, you're not.
Well, I mean, the movie does a great job as a Christian putting you into the perspective of what it's like to be, because when his wife approaches the Orthodox Church, there's an actual feeling of fear, and it's not that the church itself is meant to be fearful. It's just that you get her sense of fear and dread because there's all this built up tension and anxiety between the two faiths. And you can feel that definitely. It's almost like you feel like you're somewhere where you're not supposed to be, and you
Yeah.
feel that from her perspective. And it's a very isolating feeling. It's kind of strange coming from a perspective of someone who is not Eastern Orthodox, but Roman Catholic is like close cousins, very close cousins with it. But I do know this. Here's the other thing. Is like in my pre-married life, I had dated people who were other faiths. And one of the biggest reasons why they didn't happen was because a lot of the teachings of my faith, particularly around issues surrounding marriage, they come into conflict with even other Christian denominations, or
Yeah.
at least what's accepted, in other denominations that aren't accepted in my faith. And that's something that it strikes at the very heart of the relationship. So it's not to say that it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's like my parents are interfaith and it can work out. But I'm saying that it's like it's a lot more challenging when you
Yeah.
have two faiths, and you can't force the other person. That's the other thing. Is like, I'm glad this is a good thing. We can't force the other person to become our faith, for the sake of, of like, well, if you're going to marry me, you have to become. It's like, if that's the case, well, you can't promise that you're going to marry them. You can't just say that this deepest part of me, that if it's that deep and personal, it's like, I'm just going to have to throw that away for the relationship. So there are these real conflicts, and it brings all this to mind in a very personal way. So, and there's so many people in that situation too. It's so many people out there in that situation. It really is relevant for so many reasons, and that's just another reason why it still is too.
But like now, like as a Protestant, like interfaith relationships, they kind of almost happen all the time. However, I will say, as a Protestant, there was a time where it's like, oh, you're dating like a Methodist or you're dating a Baptist. And like that was almost like a no go. And I do know people like that. Like I know people like that right now that they won't date you or they won't marry you. Like they might date you casually, but if you're not willing to convert to their particular denomination, they won't marry you
Hmm.
whatsoever. I'm not going to sit here and say who and what denominations, because I think it happens in every single denomination. It's a big thing for people. And if you're a person that's like, well, I'm just not religious, oh, that's fine. I'm not, upset with you, or I'm not going to sit here and, bash you for not being religious. But like, once you get into like the traditional mindset of a lot of these people, you can see where they're coming from, even if you don't agree necessarily, or you realize that you're at a point in life where it's like, it's not that big of a deal for me anymore, and still respect the fact that it is a big deal for some people. That's why I never, like with Tev, I'm sitting there going, there's some part of me that's like, Tev, it's not that big of a deal, but at the same time, I'm like, it is actually a big deal.
This is just the beginning of the troubles for Ukraine too, in a way, because it's like later on when Stalin comes into power, you have the Holodomor, which is the forced, deliberate starvation of Ukraine. You take the food and leave the people to starve, and that's actually it was so big it got a name, kind of like the Holocaust did. And it's like, but most people don't remember that one, but it did happen. And it's like, and it happened right in the same area as this movie's taking place. And it's the same area that today is in a war zone because, again, Russia is decided to invade and attack Ukraine. Is they just cannot
Yeah.
you just cannot get left alone in there. They just cannot be left alone. So yeah, that was on my mind as well as I'm watching all this play out. It's like this area has just suffered so much. Some places just seem to get the brunt of it more often than others. Any movie that can like bring up that much kind of history and reflection, there's so much good in this movie. The directorial choices, how they shot some certain scenes with Tevye, and it pushes off the couple in the distance so he can have a conversation with God moments. There's those whole bunches of things like that.
As serious as this movie is, it is quite funny. They do the comedy real well. Believe it or not, I think I have like two actual maybe critiques of this movie. One, like I won't lie, like there's only one song in this, and that is If I Were a Rich Man, that to me is super memorable, and I like that. Now I'm not saying like that happens, I think, with a lot of different movies, but it's just like that's the one that that's the one that I'm going around thinking about in my head and everything. The other thing is too, and like again, I don't think this is that big of a deal because you can go look up the history yourself. I don't need it to be as violent as the Russian Revolution is. That's my only real critique of this movie. Is
Okay.
like, it talks about revolution, but it doesn't need to do more than talk about revolution, but it downplays the revolution to its probable own safety.
Yeah. I was really content with the focus the story had, staying on the more geared towards Tevye and his
Yeah.
family. The Fiddler himself, which is a great little device that the movie uses to kind of stand in for this balancing act that Tevye is, and all the people there are having to deal with in their own way, but Tevye specifically, is that, yeah, here's a figurative, and he follows him along, and at the end, Tevye just kind of, he's like, yeah, you're still here, and I'm not going to balk at your presence. I'm just going to accept you as part of life now, kind of a thing. It's like, I understand this is the way life is, kind of a thing, and I thought that was beautiful too.
I know the beginning of the movie kind of explains, like, what it means to be a fiddler on the roof. In some ways, I took the Fiddler on the Roof as being like a messenger of God, or you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Um,
he's a presence.
he's a presence. He seemed otherworldly. I don't think he's ever interacts with anybody but Tevye in the movie. I could be wrong. And then, like, when they are migrating away, he's there following them. And I just love that. It's not a big character in the movie, but it's a wonderful, welcomed character in the movie.
It is. And if I had to put like a Christian like understanding on it, I would have to think of like, with the apostles in the boat and Christ wakes up in the boat and they're like, aren't you worried? We're going to drown. And he says,
Yeah.
you're worried? Haven't you learned anything yet? Basically, it's like,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. That's kind of like that moment for me, and if he was to have a moment like that, that's what kind of a religious symbol for me. He kind of stands in the movie, is God saying, look, I know I didn't promise you it was going to be easy, but you'll be okay. One way or the other, I'm going to take care of you. But yeah, I love this movie as a Fortune and Glory. It's to get into review time here, I think. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
movie's 5
absolutely.
out of 5. So
Yeah, I put like somewhere between Trust Me and Fortune and Glory, and I only say because this is a heavy movie. Like when it's a good movie, it's a funny movie, but at the same time, it's a very heavy movie.
it is.
So like you have to be prepared to watch it. I truly believe that. Like, I mean, you can sit down and watch it, but like you've got to be prepared going into it or as you're watching it to understand that these subjects are big, big subjects, and that's important to know. But it exists more in the Fortune and Glory range for me because the acting's wonderful. The songs, like I said, they might not be as memorable, but they are wonderful in the context of the story. The story itself, the history behind the story is really good. So yeah, also Fortune and Glory.
Awesome. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's our review. So at this time, we like to remind our listeners out there that if you're having a good time listening to Ryan and me dusting off these old movies in search of celluloid treasure, please do like and subscribe and comment. And of course, follow us in your podcast purveyor of choice. Please do tell us other films you'd like us to see do, especially if they're for free, because that's what we have access to. We want to share free things with you. We love you guys out there. We don't want you to have to pay for these movies if you don't have to. You still may end up doing that anyway because Tubi doesn't keep them around all the time for free anyway. So, but at least while we're watching them, they're free. So yeah, that's the deal because this adventure comes with no strings attached. And on the subject of future episodes, Ryan, this is going to be our last episode of the second season, I believe. Tell the audience what we're watching for the last episode of the second season.
All right, you're talking about a heavy movie. We're about to watch a heavy movie.
You picked this one. This is your pick you made.
And I picked it because I've seen it around way too much, not seen it too much. This is what Tubi says. And I will say this, I'm going to preface this with this. Apparently, there has been literature written about this movie out there. This is what Tubi says. A knight returns from the Crusades and confronts death in a chess match, questioning faith and meaning as the Black Plague engulfs his land. This is directed by Ingmar Bergman. No relation to Ingrid Bergman. I actually checked. This is starring Max von Sydow, Gunnar Bjornstrand. I might have said that one correctly. Bengt Ekeroth and Niels Pape. These are Swedish names, so yeah.
Please forgive us.
And next week's film is 1957's The Seventh Seal.
The Seventh Seal. This will be my very first Ingmar Bergman film. And yes, folks out there, I did in the past, I would mix up Ingrid Bergman with Ingmar Bergman because, look, I'm American. I can be dumb sometimes, okay? Typical dumb American, yes. Any case. All right, folks. Well, we'll see you next week. And Ryan, I'll see you next week, okay?
Yep, that's tradition.
Money's the world's curse.
May the Lord smite me with it. And may I never recover.